Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar of the ECPR series on Middle Eastern policy and EU relations. My name is Christos Kourtelis, and I am an assistant professor in European public policy at Panteion University in Athens. Now, in its second year, the series continues to build on its initial aim, launched in response to concerns within the academic community following the conflict in Gaza and the challenges to academic freedom faced by affected scholars and students. It remains dedicated to fostering informed and nuanced academic debates on the cultural, economic, and political dynamics shaping Middle Eastern societies and their interactions with the wider world, offering a sustained platform for balanced and meaningful discussions. Our first discussion of this academic year focuses on Israel's domestic political landscape after the war in Gaza. And we are very lucky to have two excellent speakers with us today who can analyze different aspects of this very important topic. The first speaker is Gideon Levy. Gideon is an Israeli journalist for Haaretz and author of books related to the conflict between Israel and Palestine. For his work, he has received many awards. Among them are the Emil Grunsweig Human Rights Award, the Euromed Journalist Prize for Cultural Dialogue, the Anna Lid Foundation Journalism Award, the Olof Palme Prize, the Peace Through Media Award, and more recently, the Sokolov Prize. Gideon can help us understand how the war in Gaza has reshaped the political balance within Israel's governing coalition and the parliament, the Knesset, and how the increasing polarization is perceived in the Israeli press. We'd also love to hear his thoughts about the viability of the two-state solution and the possibility of success of the Trump plan. Gideon, welcome to the series. We are really very happy to have you with us today. The second speaker is Professor Erika Weiss. Professor Weiss is a cultural anthropologist working for the University of Tel Aviv. Her research crosses several areas of study and helps to understand the dynamics between citizenship and the relations between individuals, the state, and the law. She has written extensively about the issues of pluralism, tolerance, coexistence, and peace between different religious and ethnic groups. Her knowledge about these topics can help us understand the Israeli-Palestinian initiatives for peace and the degree of ethical responsibility of different groups after the war in Gaza. Erika, welcome to the series. We are looking forward to hearing your views about these aspects of the Israeli political landscape after the war in Gaza, how the war has impacted the relations between citizens and the military, but also the dynamics of everyday life and the coexistence between different communities within Israel. A quick note to the audience, please write your questions in the chat box and we can tell them to the speakers. I now pass the floor to the co-coordinator of series on Middle Eastern policy and EU relations, Dr. Assem Dandashly, Associate Professor at Maastricht University. Assem, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Erika and Gideon, for joining us today. I think it's a privilege to gather with you today for a conversation that is both urgent and profoundly difficult. Urgent because the realities we are witnessing continue to evolve by the day, and difficult because they compel us to look beyond familiar narratives, beyond the surface of political events, to the deeper structures that sustain them. The war in Gaza has been described in many different ways: military campaign, national trauma, humanitarian catastrophe, and increasingly as moral political collapse. In addition, many have considered it to be a genocide. Whatever language one uses, it is clear that the consequences of this war will reverberate for decades to come. According to recent reports, nearly over 67,000 Palestinians have been killed, including more than 20,000 children, the overwhelming majority of them civilians. Entire neighborhoods have been erased, basic infrastructure, hospitals, schools, water systems destroyed. The sheer scale of devastation has raised questions that reach far beyond the battlefield, questions about accountability, about the ethics of warfare, about the limits of security discourse, and about the future of coexistence between two peoples bound together by geography and history, yet divided by walls of fear and asymmetry of power. While much of the world's attention has rightly focused on the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and on the ongoing assaults in the occupied West Bank, tonight we turn our gaze inward, toward Israel itself, and toward the ways in which this war has reshaped its domestic political landscape. This is not the first time that war or mass violence has redefined Israeli politics, but perhaps never before have we witnessed such an intense convergence of internal crisis and external conflict. The current situation has deepened social divides, unsettled institutional balances, and brought long simmering tensions to the surface between security and democracy, between the military and civilian leadership, between a sense of collective fear and the demands of moral accountability. The coalition government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, already fragile before October, now faces unprecedented scrutiny, not only for its handling of the war and the hostages situation, but for what the war has revealed about the priorities and contradictions of Israeli governance itself. The opposition, meanwhile, has struggled to articulate a credible alternative amid the emotional weight of wartime politics and the pervasive rhetoric of national unity. And all the while, public discourse has become increasingly polarized, shaped by competing narratives of victimhood, resilience, and denial. At stakes is more than the question of political leadership. What is unfolding is a deeper reckoning and the character of the Israeli state itself, with the meaning of democracy in the context of prolonged occupation, with the fragility of institutions under the strain of permanent conflict, and with the moral cost of a political order built on exceptionalism and militarization. In recent months, violence has surged not only in Gaza, but also across the occupied West Bank, where illegal settler attacks, often carried out under military protection, have intensified. These acts are not isolated. They form part of the same political ecosystem, one that blurs the line between state policy and vigilantism, between governance and ideology. The persistence of such violence challenges the very idea that there can be a political or moral separation between Israel's internal politics and its rule over Palestinians beyond the Green Line. This is why our conversation matters a lot tonight, because domestic politics cannot be understood in isolation from the broader moral and geopolitical context in which they unfold. The recent war in Gaza has not only transformed Israel's regional standing, it has also shaped and reshaped its internal discourse, its political alignments, and the relationship between the citizens and the state. And beyond the immediate politics lies a deeper question: what kind of society emerges from prolonged conflict and moral blindness? What happens to a democracy when it is perpetually mobilized for war? When fear becomes the organizing principle of political life? Can democratic institutions retain their integrity when they are bound to sustain an unequal and violent order? These are not abstract questions. They cut to the heart of Israel's present crisis and its uncertain future. Some speak today of a post-war political reckoning, new elections, of the possible realignment of the center and the left. Others warn of an even sharper turn toward authoritarian populism, nationalism, and religious extremism. Both possibilities are real, and both depend on how society, institution, and political actors respond to this moment of rupture. And yet, beyond Israel's internal debate, there remains the unresolved question of coexistence. Can Israelis and Palestinians imagine living together, not merely side by side, but in genuine equality and mutual recognition? Or has the war in Gaza buried, perhaps for a generation, the last fragile hope of a two-state solution or any solution for the long-term conflict? To reflect on these questions, we are honored to have with us two remarkable voices, as was introduced by Chris, Gideon Levy and Professor Erika Weiss. Together, they bring both analytical depth and moral clarity to this discussion. Their insights will help us move beyond headlines and slogans toward a deeper understanding how this war and the politics that sustained it have transformed the internal fabric of Israeli society. Our aim tonight is not to assign blame or to indulge in despair, but to think critically about the conditions that make peace, democracy, and accountability possible, or maybe impossible. To ask, in other words, what kind of political imagination remains after such a war, and what moral reckoning is still conceivable in the shadow of this war. So as we begin, I invite all of us to approach this conversation with openness, humility, and a shared sense of responsibility for analysis, for truth, and for the moral and political future of this region that continues to test our collective conscience. Without further delay, I give the floor to Gideon Levy. Please.
Thank you very much, Assem. Thank you very much, Chris. First of all, I would like to ask, what is the time framework? How long shall I talk now?
I think you can talk about for 15 to 20 minutes, Gideon, and then you can give another 15, 20 minutes to Erica, and then perhaps 10, 15 minutes for questions.
Sure. It means a lot that you are in Athens, because 2 weeks ago I was in your city receiving from your mayor, Charis Doukas, the Democracy Prize, which was for me very encouraging and very, very, really made me happy, and I enjoyed your city so much. Coming to the subject, which is a little less funny. On the 7th of October, 23, something really dramatic happened to Israeli society. I'm not speaking about the mourning, the shock, the trauma, the surprise, the pain. It's all totally human and clear, goes without saying, unprecedented. Israel never faced such an attack, never faced such a surprise and such a fiasco. But two more things happened when time passes to Israeli society. First of all, almost all the Israelis, I have no researches on this, but my intuition tells me that almost all Israelis thought that after the 7th of October, Israel has the right to do whatever it wants to Gaza. And the second thing which came together was that after the 7th of October, most of the Israelis, not all of them, lost any interest in the Palestinians, in their fate, in their tragedies. They don't want to know anything about them. They don't want to hear anything about them, not to watch anything about them. And most of them, and polls show it, think that in Gaza there are no innocent people, including not the newborn babies, which were slaughtered. 1,000 babies were slaughtered in this war by Israel. They had no room for the pain of the other. They were all concentrated in their own pain. The media recruited itself voluntarily, not by any order, voluntarily to serve this narrative. And for 2 years, the Israeli media played a shameful, in my view, even criminal role by totally covering up and hiding what's going on in Gaza. If you watch Israeli media, you get the impression that in Gaza there were 20 human beings living, the 20 hostages. No one else lives there, no one else suffers there. Oh yes, also the soldiers, but no one except of them. Israelis say clearly, we don't want to know. And the media served them from commercial reasons, nothing to do with ideological reasons, to please them, not to lose them. So for 2 years, any Greek citizen saw more of Gaza than any average Israeli, by far more. It's not the Israelis cannot see Gaza. They can see Gaza. There are enough media, international media outlets, but when you don't want to see and you don't want to hear, nothing is easier than to concentrate on the local media and get all the systematical brainwash, which didn't stop for one moment. The Israeli media is still on the 7th of October. Every day you will hear about hostages and families and killed soldiers as if it happened yesterday. Not that I think that it was something, I've been to the kibbutzim on the 9th of October and I saw what happened there. It was really a terrible catastrophe. But if a media tells you every day for 2 years the same stories of victimization, not totally ignoring the sacrifice of the other people, which is 1,000 times bigger, then you understand that there is no media in Israel. There is only a branch of propaganda, of brainwash, of letting the people know what they want to know and preventing them from what they don't want to know. And this has a crucial role in shaping their consciousness. You know, many times I show friends, part of them from the what's called or used to be called the peace camp, videos from Gaza. And you know what they would tell me? Oh, this is AI, this is fake news. What proofs do you have that it is true? There were terrorists hiding there. Anything justifies the crimes, but anything with the collaboration of the media. This creates a new society. Nothing of this is new, because Israel is living in denial for decades when it comes to the occupation. It's not like we see a new phenomena, but many things were intensified and above all legitimized. Now it's totally legitimate to ignore slaughtering of thousands of people, tens of thousands of children. It's all legitimate. It's all self-defense in the eyes of the Israelis. The average Israeli will tell you, what did you want us to do after the 7th of October? As if there is either not to do anything or to go for genocide. In the middle, there is nothing. This corrupts the people. This corrupts its moral values for many years. And this also destroyed totally the image of Israel overseas. I don't have to tell you, just go to the streets and see the graffitis that I saw on every corner, and the flags, obviously. But I'm less troubled by this, because I'm more troubled now about what happened to the society in front of the mirror, not in front of the world. And I'm very troubled about the role of the media contributing to this change. The outcome is that practically there is no real peace camp in Israel anymore, except of the margins. There is a big, impressive protest movement, as you know, very devoted. Really, my total admiration to those people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, every day, every weekend, going to the streets and protesting. But listen to the content of their protest. There are two things, main things in their protest. First of all, obviously, to do anything possible to release the hostages. What is more understandable than this? And secondly, to get rid of Netanyahu. Later on, there came also the demand to stop the war, but again, because of the killed soldiers, because it endangered the hostages, almost nothing about the genocide. Only in the margins. Yeah, in the margins also of the demonstrations, there were brave Israelis who stood with the picture, with the photos of the slaughtered children. And there was a protest like this, but it was not the main volume of this protest. The main volume was anti-Netanyahu, pro-releasing the hostages, pro-ending the war for the wrong reasons. And here we are now. By the way, many were said it very frankly. They said, let's stop the war, get the hostages, and after we release the hostages, go back to the war. Do whatever you want in Gaza. Just release the hostages. We don't care what will be next. This is obviously a moral, I don't know how to call it, a moral sickness. This is a moral darkness. Not to see and not to be willing to see, and obviously not to be able and be willing to take any kind of accountability. You didn't hear one word of regret by any mainstream Israelis about what we have done to the Palestinians in Gaza. Not to speak about the West Bank, which is totally, you mentioned it, which is totally in the darkness, but things are happening there, not in the scale of Gaza, but it might get there. And the West Bank is totally under the radar. Nobody has interest in what's going on there. But in any case, the outcome is victimization. First of all, vis-a-vis the world. It's not our crimes, it's your anti-Semitism. It's not our crimes. You hate us whatever we do. No matter what we will do, you will always hate us. So it's your fault, not ours. We have nothing to regret. We have nothing to apologize. It's you who should be blamed. And when they say you, they talk about all the critics of Israel as if all the critics of Israel are anti-Semites, which is obviously a huge, huge lie. There are anti-Semites who take advantage of this opportunity, but most of the people who criticize Israel are people of conscience who cannot be silent vis-a-vis the images of Gaza. Yeah, there are people who cannot stand a war in which 1,000 babies, 20,000 children, 250 journalists are killed. They cannot accept it all over the world. And that's the big, by the way, the big achievement of the Palestinians, because after many years in which they were totally forgotten, they became the issue number one in the world, all over the world. Embassy to the Palestinians. I'm not sure it will be translated into political achievements. As a matter of fact, I have my doubts. But popularity, solidarity, all over the world, as they deserve, by the way. Now we are facing a new stage, the ceasefire. So first of all, we should be extremely happy that the war stopped. This by itself is a huge, huge achievement. No doubt that everyone is happy in Israel. Everyone is happy. Really euphoria. The release of the hostages created really euphoria, which is totally human and totally understandable. I could just say that the fact that 2,000 Palestinian prisoners were released was hardly covered in Israeli media. You didn't see them. 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Most of them were never brought to justice. Most of them. But they are all obviously murderers and terrorists, and they deserve death penalty and whatever you want to hear, you can hear in Israeli media. They were released without any human sign of it. So there are three values, I would say, which existed in Israeli society before and are now much stronger and much more explicit. The first is the victimization. We carried many, many years. The late Golda Meir, the Israeli prime minister, said it once in the best way: after the Holocaust, nobody will tell the Jews what to do. And way of thinking that we are the biggest victims of humankind, which is true. And this should enable us to do whatever we want. To this, you have to add the value of the chosen people, which is still very strong, including among secular Jews who will not admit it. But the feeling is that, there is international law. It applies to any country, but not Israel. Israel is a special case. You will always hear it. We are a special case. International law is for other countries, not for us. The fact that our prime minister and defense minister are wanted, like the criminals from Yugoslavia and criminals from Africa, passes here as if it doesn't exist. For Israelis, doesn't mean much that they are wanted, that they are Milosevic's. No, not in Israel. And the third value, so victimization, chosen people, and the third one, which is the worst of them all, because this will prevent us to get any agreement with the Palestinians ever, is obviously the total dehumanization of the Palestinians. Their life worth nothing. The day before yesterday, 2 soldiers were killed. The retaliation, including killing 45 Palestinians. And this was accepted as, it goes without saying. That's the way it should be. Ever since the ceasefire started, Israel killed another 40 people before the killing of the soldiers, not even mentioned. Anything which has to do with their lives is totally ignored, and I can't think about a cheaper product in Israel's eyes rather than the life of a Palestinian. The life of Palestinian. And again, it's not new. It's going on ever since the occupation started and maybe ever since Zionism started. But today it got to its peak. Really, I mean, this mass killing, you cannot commit it without dehumanizing your victims. Because otherwise, how will you digest it? Think about the soldiers. They are the sons of our friends and the friends of our sons. We all know them, we all love them. To think that they killed 1,000 babies less than 1 year old? Can we adjust it? Can we digest it? That our wonderful, beautiful pilots, those brave, intelligent, really brilliant young people, they are killing babies and children by 10,000s? No way. So we have to dehumanize them in order to somehow to digest it. So those three values are now stronger than ever. And I don't see how we are going out of it, how we heal ourselves. There are talkings now about, you mentioned the two-state solution. I see that my time is running out. I think the two-state solution died long time ago. Continuing of talking about the two-state solution will lead us only to the continuance of the occupation forever, because I think most of the people, not all of them, but most of the people, both in Israel and also more and more abroad, understand that there is no room for a Palestinian state. The settlers took over, the settlers won. We have to understand it. I mean, unfortunately, most of the Israelis never visited the West Bank. Go and see what happened in the West Bank in the last 2 years, and you will understand there is no room for a viable Palestinian state. There's a room for a Bantustan. This will not solve anything. There will be no viable Palestinian state. And if I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to admit it, and because it's the best solution, the two-state solution, no doubt about it. But I think it's a train that left the station and will never come back. And here we stand with only two alternatives. It is a one state for many years. The only problem is that it's by all means not a democracy. Practically in one part of it, it's one of the most brutal tyrannies in the world today, in the West Bank and in many ways in Gaza. So either we turn into a democracy or we continue to be an apartheid state. I don't see a third way. I know that it's a terrible choice because a one democracy between the river and the sea, one person, one vote, means the end of the dream of a Jewish state, the end of the dream of a Palestinian state, the end of Zionism. But what alternative do we have? The alternative is to continue the apartheid forever. So it's really a turning point. I want to believe that maybe this war and all the shocks and the aftershocks will lead us to try to think, where are we aiming to? Where are we going to? Unfortunately, until now, I see the Israeli society being only preoccupied by the ceasefire, the hostages, preparing themselves for the next elections, hoping that Netanyahu will be replaced without any alternative candidate who thinks differently than Netanyahu. Don't be wrong. When it comes to the occupation, to the apartheid, to the genocide, they all think the same. None of them is offering an alternative. I want to remind ourselves that in a vote in the Knesset a few weeks ago, there was a total majority against a Palestinian state. Even this is not in the agenda of Israel's opposition. So where are we aiming to? I mean, we live all our lives on our swords. We became already a pariah state. We will always depend on characters like Donald Trump and Viktor Orban and this kind of leaders who are the only one who talk to us now. What is the goal, the end game? You will not get an answer. And unfortunately, my answers are totally rejected by almost any Israeli, so I'm totally irrelevant. And thank you for this opportunity to talk to you.
Many thanks for presenting the reality in Israel in such terms, Gideon. We pass the floor quickly to Erica, and we will have the time to discuss all the questions that will pop up in a few minutes. Erica, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to continue from this trajectory. I mean, I think that, first of all, I agree with this framing. I think that I will start from that framing and then turn to domestically, I think, the state of Israeli democracy at the moment and what this means for that. First thing I think I want to say is that the idea that we are after the war is a very weird definition from an anthropological perspective, one might say. I mean, there's certainly it's true in a very state geopolitical definition, but thinking about the ways in which we are after anything is perhaps misleading to some extent, right? Because Gaza was destroyed over a period of time, and the stopping of that has not fixed anything, right? So there's a sense of being after war that one assumes going back to some kind of normality. And I don't think that that is true for either Palestinian society in Gaza or the West Bank, or Israeli society for that matter. I think that to a large extent, the fabric of Israeli society has torn so dramatically that it's also not a situation of going back to something that was previously. And that's in addition to the fact that it would be very difficult to describe the current situation as in any way post-conflict. There are still very much two groups very much in conflict, and you can see that very strongly from the Israeli side. There has been a dramatic decline in support for the Palestinian state to almost non-existent levels at the moment, and nothing else is on the table. So the idea that we're after war, it's a brief pause in violence of the most extreme sort, but the idea that we are post-conflict, I don't think we can compare this situation to any of the kind of analogous situations of post-conflict that we usually compare these things to, for example, in the Balkans or other areas in which really there has been some kind of breakthrough and the task turns to repairing relations and repairing society, because there has not been that breakthrough in relations. There is no Palestinian state or other viable political alternative. So without that having happened, to say that this is after war is just an unusual definition, and certainly not one that reflects kind of the feeling of the ground or even the political realities of the people involved. I think that in terms of Israeli society, intra-Israeli society, and its kind of claims to being the only democracy in the Middle East, as it has long said, I think shifts have happened with regard to that as well. That claim was always a very difficult one, certainly since the start of the occupation, in which there was rule over people that don't vote. So claiming democracy was always a very difficult claim to make. But even within Israeli citizenship, this was a difficult claim to substantiate anyway. Palestinian society, that Palestinian citizens of Israel have very strong ambivalence towards participation in Israeli politics. Many Palestinians, I think understandably, abstain from voting and from participating in Israeli politics in order to give legitimacy to, not to give legitimacy to the government. They're not the only group that's kind of sidelined when we're even thinking about the Israeli demos. Also, ultra-Orthodox society was never really integrated, and the idea that people attempted to integrate them, I think, was probably a false one. So you're already talking about a huge portion of the population that even before the current tensions and splits within society was kind of sidelined out of the idea of the demos to begin with, right? So you're starting with a bit of a majority, but not even that much of one. And then the kind of tensions that have happened and splits that have happened during the war and before have really torn apart, I think, whatever might have been left of that. I think that a lot of this is going to unfold in the coming years. A lot of the anger that people experience will unfreeze. That was things that were frozen during the war because people didn't have the political space to express them because of the really strong demand for solidarity and strong demand not to complain about your plight while the war is going on. But the war economy certainly exposed economic inequalities in Israeli society. Those who have been in the periphery of the country definitely paid a price, as they have for many years. And those who could afford, to kind of weather the losses of income when they have to do reserve duty. This is internal splits that have to do with class, but also have to do with ethnicity within Israeli society. And these things have been brought to the surface in really, really concrete and material ways that I think will become more and more apparent. Joseph Wheeler wrote a blog post exploring the concept of democracy through the lens of the demos. The people, the understanding of the people whose collective identity and mutual recognition make democratic governance really meaningful. And he was arguing that the problem in Israeli society today is largely due to the fact that the polarization in Israeli society is kind of heading off a cliff to be much more than polarization. It's becoming fragmentation. That the idea that polarization is not a strong enough word to even describe kind of the crisis of governance. It's not just a crisis of governance in the sense of legal institutions, but really kind of an ontological fracture in the sense of any kind of shared citizenship on a level of belonging, which, as I noted, was already fragmented because of the exclusion of very large groups even prior. But this is a point in which democracy loses its legitimacy and becomes kind of an empty form. And we know these terminologies, right? So we've heard about democratic backsliding in many places around the world that have been compared to Israel, Hungary being one of them, Turkey, a lot of places in terms of the institutions and the waning of democratic institutions in these places have been compared to Israel. But I think that even before the war, the kind of legal transformations that were attempted in Israel, which were kind of introduced in order to really limit the ability of the Israeli Supreme Court to control the government or control the actions of the Israeli state and the Israeli military, were certainly things that undermined democracy on the one hand, but also caused a very dramatic split in the Israeli populace as well, with one side trying to kind of rescue an idea, probably a myth of Israeli society as a democracy from what they saw as the barbarians at the gate, and the other kind of trying to claim it from what they perceived as an old guard elite force that didn't deserve to hold the reins of democracy anymore. So thinking about these splits that then continued into the war, right? So at the opposition to Bibi a few years ago was this opposition to the legal reforms, and they were strong and organized, but that was the only content to it. And then during the war, it became, as Gideon points out, for the hostages, and an end to the war only as kind of a way to get the hostages back. But again, that became the only content of this opposition. It was the only thing. And now that that has happened, this has kind of dissolved. And one of the issues we're looking at is the way in which you have a society with a ruling party and an opposition that just dissolves and doesn't exist. It exists only through very specific mobilizations, self-defensive mobilizations towards their own interests, but it is not, doesn't have ideological content. It doesn't have, at this point, moral content. It doesn't have a lot of political legitimacy either, but it has kind of seeped into the very deep ideas of identity and the splits in Israeli society. So a group that sees itself very much as defending Israeli democracy and the kind of what Israel maybe used to be, although certainly one can argue with that romanticization very fairly. And a new, very supportive of the administration, right-wing movement that defines itself in opposition to them. So the split in the demos, I think, is really important to understand this fracture. The polarization is a precursor to fracture. Polarization is not a new thing. Liberal democracies have always faced them, but it becomes existential in a new way when citizens start to see their opponents not as adversaries, but as people that are alien to the society. And as I said, there were already groups that were defined as alien to society. Palestinian citizens were defined even before these splits as alien to Israeli society. Ultra-Orthodox were defined as alien to Israeli society. And now these two fighting sides of kind of the mainstream and the opposition are seeing each other as alien to society rather than just being in political opposition. And the implications of that are quite severe. Like at some point, this challenges the idea of majoritarian rule, because one of the ideas of democracy is that even if you lose, you accept that loss and you go with the general will of the people. But when you start to see the group that won as illegitimate aliens or people who have betrayed the country or committed treason or are illegitimate members of society, then this ultimately just threatens the idea that you will go along with what they've said. And since we already have this kind of very fractured demos to begin with, because there was never full inclusion of these major groups, then this further fracture really normalizes the idea that Israeli society, the different groups don't respect each other at all, don't consider each other legitimate at all, and are not going to be able to work together. I think that what we've seen over the last few years, sorry to bring in kind of hardcore anthropology to this group, but nevertheless, I'm going to do it. In 1936, an anthropologist named Gregory Bateson wrote a book called Maven, based on fieldwork in Papua New Guinea. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but he came up with this really interesting idea, which was called schismogenesis. Schism from splitting, and genesis from the creation. So where does it come? The creation of this split. Okay, so the idea that society always has fractures. Society always has these different ideological groups, and there are always going to be tensions. But there becomes a point where they become from tensions into fissures or actual fractures in society. And he says that when these differences, a few things happen. One is when these differences map on to different elements of society. So be it class or ethnicity or other things, when the ideology maps onto different ethnicities, this will cause a real split. So we definitely see, in terms of Israeli society and divisions between Ashkenazi Jews, Mizrahi Jews, that there's a mapping on, and in class, middle class, lower class, there's a mapping on of ideology onto these already pre-existing group divides that are based on ethnicity and are based on class. So that further antagonizes the splits between society. Clearly, the Palestinians as a category within Israeli society and the ultra-Orthodox were already kind of divided out. So we have this mapping on in which ideology maps onto internal divides in a very strong way and causes a real split. The other element is that the groups start defining each other in opposition. So it's not just that we have these ideological differences. It's that when you make a criticism of me, I say, yeah, exactly, and I'm not you. So if you want to call it like, so for example, the mainstream, it's not left, but let's say the center today is saying that the right is fascist. And the right responds by saying, yeah, we're fascist, which is not something they would have said independently. And certainly the politicians aren't saying that, but on the street, people will say things like that. And they will counter-accuse the center of being elitist, and the elitists will absorb that and say, yeah, we're elitists and you are barbarians. So really not just having ideological differences, but kind of feeding off of the differences between the groups and further pushing them apart from each other in a very, very active way that is a feedback loop as opposed to something that reaches some kind of equilibrium. So what we have seen is that this used to, in Israeli society, between these groups, which as I feel the need to keep mentioning, was a bare majority to begin with, there was some kind of reaching equilibrium between them for many, many years. And today we see much more of a feedback loop in which they are pushing farther and farther apart through a process of polarization that is unsimilar to what we have seen before, and a political opposition that really is just defined by very, very narrow things. I want to also emphasize something that Gideon has said about how little Israeli society cares about European judgment of them, which I think is something that a lot of that is done with very good intention, people feeling that they need to make statements and to do acts to kind of try and influence Israeli society. I think that it's quite remarkable to see the ways in which it has backfired when you're looking at that from within. And if anything, and I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't be done, but that I'm just reporting the effects are that it really backfires, and Israelis tend to take it as confirmation of their righteousness and confirmation of their being on the right path, as opposed to taking it as critique that they will internalize. And this has been a very, very long element of Israeli society. David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, very famously said shmum, which is basically like UN, like who cares, like we don't mind at all. And then he had to follow that with a quote that's quoted quite frequently, which is, it's not in the global arena, but rather from within Israel, that Israel will be strengthened and stand. These are the things that will determine our destiny more than any external factor in the world. Our future is not dependent on what the Gentiles will say, but rather on what the Jews will do. And this is the idea, like when non-Jews object to Israeli actions, it's taken as kind of almost a cosmic force that's trying to stop them from what they should be doing. It's almost taken as confirmation about the righteousness of what's being done. And Hannah Arendt also in 1948 was articulating the mood of the country, which was so similar to the dominant mood of the country today. She said the Jewish experience in the last decades, or over the last centuries, or over the last 2,000 years, has finally awakened us and taught us to look out for ourselves. She's kind of mocking this idea, right? She's not endorsing it. She's just reporting it. This is what people have come to think. Have finally awakened us and taught us to look out for ourselves. This alone is reality. Everything else is stupid sentimentality. Everybody is against us. In the final analysis, we count upon nobody except ourselves. In sum, we are ready to go down fighting, and will consider anybody who stands in our way a traitor, and anything done to hinder us as a stab in the back. I think this really sums up the mentality in 1948. It really sums up the mentality today. And thus, when there's an announcement from the ICC prosecutor, for example, that would be seeking indictments for Prime Minister Netanyahu or Defense Minister at the time, Yoav Gallant. This is received very much by the vast majority of Jewish Israelis in a very resentful spirit. The same is true of the ICJ decision that Israel should end its offensive in Rafah quite a while ago. And it's fair to say that these decisions do not result in a kind of moral accounting or collective soul searching, but really very much add fuel to a very widely held sentiment that the world, just by definition almost, stands against Israel, regardless of Israeli actions, and is in constant search for an opportunity to find fault or weaken Israeli standing. And I think that sentiment is really widely held and crosses a lot of the internal divisions that I described. So you have on the one hand kind of a ripped fabric of Israeli society that they can't get along with each other about almost anything except the fact that the world hates them, more or less, if I can summarize. And I just wanted to just spend just a couple moments talking about military-civilian relations, which is very difficult to generalize about. There has been, especially right now, there's been a very high level of service and not the same degree of a refusal movement or that in which soldiers decide that they're unwilling to do these things from the military as there has been in other wars. There has been some. There's definitely a feeling of exhaustion. There's a praising in most of Israeli society of the heroism of the younger generation, but also even with all of the media self-censorship that Gideon spoke about so articulately, there still are videos of soldiers disrespecting and stories of cruelty that are absolutely nauseating that do filter into Israeli society. They come in drips and drabs and through non-standard channels, and people hear about them. Furthermore, PTSD has never been really part of the Israeli vocabulary, and today is much more so. We are seeing the results of it. We are seeing that there is a suicide epidemic whose proportions are unclear because the Israeli military is not willing to report faithfully about those numbers. But it certainly anecdotally and through people is very, very clear that there is a suicide epidemic, which was something that's consistent with things we've seen in other places like the US and even the Ukraine. When you look at these things, that soldiers going through these things are definitely having mental health issues, having PTSD, and going through just tons of difficulties themselves. I think that also when we think about childhood, this is something that we cannot know immediately the effects of. I think for the next generation, the war has definitely shaped childhood, a normalization of war, a normalization of the presence of guns, which was already very, very high in Israeli society, but is now even more so. A normalization of violence, a normalization of enmity towards Palestinians, and Gaza has just become part of I have young children, this is why I'm focusing on this. The idea that these are completely normal parts of daily life have become part of Israeli childhood. The normalization of death has become part of Israeli childhood. Alarms, safe rooms, and funerals, I mean, not even to compare to what this war has done to childhood in Gaza. I would never think to make equalize between them. But even within relatively protected Israeli society, this has become defining. The violence has become defining. The exposure to violence on television, on posters, in discourse is something that I think the psychological toll of it is not clear yet and may take us many years to understand. But I think will be something that Israeli society pays for very, very heavily in that sense, in the sense that there is no free violence. The assault on Gaza, what they have done there, I think at the end of the day comes back and impacts your domestic life in terms of mental health and the price that society has to pay for those things as well. So I think I will end it there.
Thank you so much, both Gideon and Erika, for this thoughtful and interesting and all your insights. I think you gave us a lot of food for thought. We were hoping for more optimist interventions, but unfortunately we have to be also realistic.
Yeah.
And we did get a lot of questions on the issues that you raised, and I think we'll start with the easy ones before moving to the more difficult questions. And we have a question on Netanyahu staying in power and without trying to re-escalate the conflict, and one related to the use of always making these comparisons to September 11 to legitimize more the use of force, security, we are under threat, etc., and to move even more in the direction what the Americans did with the Patriot Act. Maybe Gideon, you can answer that. And the second question maybe to Erica, and of course, feel free to touch on each other's points, etc. For Erica, we do hear a lot about the the Israeli society, rehumanizing, dehumanization, the victimhood. What is there any segment in the Israeli society who still can't accept to live side by side with the Palestinians and look at them as real human beings that we can live together? And also in terms of the Israeli society, what would be the role of the Arab Israelis in all of this? And I think I would add something related to the diasporas. Is there any role for the Palestinians and Israelis living in the diasporas who do want peace and to live side by side without any conflict? Is there any role for them in all what's happening? I think maybe Gideon, you want to start, and then we move to Erica.
Very happy you directed the real complicated questions to Erica. Mine is much more simple. You mentioned 9/11. Why to mention 9/11 and not the Holocaust? Most of the Israelis are talking in terms of Holocaust, not 9/11. The most common analogy is that the 7th of October, it is the second greatest catastrophe that happened after the Holocaust to the Jewish people, as if it is comparable at all. And from here comes also, obviously, the comparison between Hamas and the Nazis. Don't you dare to put any doubts about it. The Hamas are Nazis. What do you mean? And this all is in one framework that I tried to describe before, of victimization, dehumanization, and here comes also the demonization of the Palestinians in general. Even Hamas is demonized. Whatever they do is demonized. I'm not their fan at all, and I'm not here to speak in favor of them. They enabled, it gives you just a sense of how Israeli society, Israeli media is saying. Few minutes before the release of the hostages, they let few hostages to talk over the cellular phone with their families, first time after 2 years. In Israel media, it was described as an act of sadism. I mean, those sadists, they wanted to flame it even more, to let the families suffer more. It was, I think, a total innocent act, human act of letting them talk, because, every minute counts and they wanted already to be sure that they are alive. That's the way things are framed here. In any discussion, you will always hear the lies of Hamas, as if there are no lies of Israel. The violations of the ceasefire, as if Israel didn't violate the ceasefire one time after the other. So all this, but the question was also about Netanyahu. As any populist leader or statesman or politician, he is the most beloved and the most hated Israeli politician ever. by far. Those who follow him will follow him blindly, automatically, and totally, no matter what he does. And there's no effect of whatever he does on them. They will always justify him. And those who hate him no matter what he does. If he will bring, I don't know what, the moon to Israel, down to Israel, they will say that this is fake. And both camps see him as something which is far beyond what he really is. Now, if to translate it into political terms, in all the polls ever since the war started, there was not one single poll among those polls who are perceived as professional. There was not one single poll which shows that he's going to win the elections, that he's going to gain a majority. I mean, his coalition, in any case, we are dealing with coalition governments, and he has no single poll which shows that he's going to be re-elected. But I wouldn't exclude another victory of him, because he is really a magician of politics, and he's really, for the good and for the bad, so different from all the other candidates who are very pale vis-a-vis him. So logic says that it's over, that he will be not re-elected. But there is a big room for surprises. And above all, I want to warn here anyone who thinks that once we get rid of Netanyahu, Israel will turn into a paradise. Remember very well what Israel was before Netanyahu, and you'll see that Israel after Netanyahu will be different, will be better, but it's not the Israel that we all wish for.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Gideon, excuse me, Erika. Gideon, what is the percentage in the Israeli public of the blind followers of Netanyahu?
It's very hard to judge, but if you go to the, I would say there is a hardcore of 30-40% who is really hardcore Netanyahu. And there is maybe a bigger camp who is hardcore anti-Netanyahu. And then there are those in between, which includes the Haredim, they include the Arabs that Erika mentioned as two alienated groups. And but you know, on top of the hardcore, there might be a movement from camp to camp. You know, depends on the moment, depends on what we'll see. I'm sure that Netanyahu, after the release of the hostages, is in a bit better position than Netanyahu before the release of the hostages, even though he doesn't gain any credit in Israel public opinion. They all give the credit, and rightly so, to Donald Trump. But things might change, and he is a magician. And therefore, I wouldn't exclude, as I say, the possibility that he will be not re-elected. I must mention here, if you may let me, Netanyahu knows to play on the sentiments of the oppressed one, or those who feel oppressed in Israeli Jewish society. And he's playing this in a very articulated way, and they really love him because they see he is totally a privileged Israeli, best universities in the United States, an aristocratic family, if there is aristocracy in Israel, son of a historian, very well off. I mean, but he knew to identify himself with those who feel oppressed, and they will not leave him. They will never leave him. For them, he is like almost a Messiah. You don't know, they love him. And they feel that all his enemies are their enemies. And he plays on this ground of the elites and the deep state, and all those who want to get rid of him because he stands with the oppressed one. You see it with many other populist leaders in South America and elsewhere. That's Netanyahu.
Yeah, Erica, thanks. Thank you, Gideon. Erica, please.
Yeah, the question of whether today Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side is obviously on the one hand an impossible question, and I will try to put as much optimism on it as I can, but it is difficult. It is very, very difficult, even within Israeli society. I think that we have to acknowledge that things have been lost that cannot be repaired, that certain relations have been destroyed, that I cannot imagine that they can be repaired with this generation. There's a certain level of violence, a certain level of animosity, a certain level of pain that you can cause that you cannot undo. And I like to, in my work, look historically at other situations in which Arabs and Jews and Muslims and Jews have lived together, have supported each other, have fostered wonderful relations with each other in many different contexts. Those are different situations. They take place under a different model. The relations have different logics than the ethno-national logic of Israeli society. Whether Israel provides the space for people to live together with its very dominant ethno-national framing is a really difficult question. And I think that I do work in a mixed city in Israel and look at how people coexist on a very, very daily level. And there were very interesting things about the ways that especially Mizrahi Jews and Palestinian citizens of Israel would live side by side, sometimes sharing even the Arabic language, sharing different cultural elements, and were able to kind of forge some patterns of coexistence with each other that were very, very interesting and very unusual in Israeli society. Even those today, I think, have been broken. I think that when I speak to Palestinian citizens, Arab citizens in those towns, and I ask them about their relations with Jews that were previously their friends, they say it's too difficult today. It's too difficult. I know that their children are in the military. I know what they're doing there. I know what's going on. I know what their opinions are. And we used to be, a few years ago, we were friends and I still had hope. And today, I can't. I can't face it. I can't go to their house. I can't drink coffee with them. I can't see them. I can't be that today. Whether it can go back, even in these small places, in these small moments, I'm not sure. Whether I think that the hope for for Israelis and Palestinians in diaspora is an interesting one, but because they are in places with very different logics and understandings, there's the freedom that they have that within Israeli-Palestinian society, that freedom does not exist. Kind of a freedom of choosing your identity, of making that identity more or less important, emphasizing it, not emphasizing it, kind of disappearing into an anonymous society. These are not conditions that exist in Israel-Palestine, where the situation is very, very different, and where the hurt is very immediate and very, very present and very, very defining of your entire life in ways that these diaspora populations perhaps no longer experience at the same levels of intensity. So whether or not they can be a positive influence, I would like to think so. I'm very skeptical. I am in a very difficult position of also thinking that the former Israeli left that has now disappeared never really had a very good chance. They were far too secular. They were far too removed from the daily concerns of people. I think that there needs to be a religious left that comes out, and those numbers of people are so small. There are so few religious leftists that it's very difficult for me to realistically, to politically, to pin my hopes on them. Although ideologically, I think that would be the space it should come from.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks, Gideon. I have a follow-up for Gideon. Like you mentioned about like the population that will follow Netanyahu bluntly, and he's like the messiah for them. But don't they see that the policies or the strategies of Netanyahu have basically threatened all the neighboring countries, like made Israel more in a state of war with everyone around it? Also, like with the Abraham Accords being on hold until like further notice, like do they see all the side effects or the consequences of Netanyahu's policies and how they affect the society in Israel and the Israeli state? Letting aside like the public opinion in Europe and the West like has shifted significantly towards anti-Israel. Do they see anything in the media and the social media or anything on that can shift their attitude or like their following Netanyahu like blindly?
It surprise you, Assem. They are very happy about it. It just proves how big Netanyahu is. You must understand that a very strong sentiment in those circles is the hatred toward the Arabs, even though most of them come from Arab states, not all of them, but most of them. But maybe because of this, and maybe also because you always look down at those who are even lower than you in the social strata, in the social structure. They hate the Arabs, and he shows them, and he beats them as they deserve. They don't want peace with the Arabs. They don't believe in peace with the Arabs, like he doesn't believe in peace. And if there is a price, there is a price. We are ready to pay it. And above all, Israelis didn't pay until now any real price. There is something in the air, but you know, life in Israel is still, put aside the war, the fears, the mourning, the trauma, but life in Israel is quite good. And if it's not good, it's bearable. Israelis didn't pay until now, or didn't feel that they are paying something for the occupation, for the genocide, for the war in Gaza, because they are, first of all, part of them see it as force majeure. There was no other way but to go for genocide. As I said before, what did you want us to do? It's a natural development. They killed 2,000 Israelis. We will kill 67,000. That's the way that nature goes. I mean, there is no other way for most of Israelis. And secondly, there is this urge to beat the Arabs because there is this deep feeling that they were all born to kill, that they all have only one thing in their mind, and this is to push us to the ocean. And therefore, Netanyahu shows them he is this alpha male who shows them that's very good for Israel. And as for Europe, you know, Erika mentioned it. Europe, in any case, is not being taken seriously here, and a lot of blames also toward Europe, and a lot of arrogance toward Europe, a lot of arrogance. And Israel didn't pay any price. I mean, Europe didn't charge any price from Israel until now. You know, there are things in the air, sanctions, boycott, here, there, academical boycott. It's not things that you feel still. You don't feel them on a daily basis. It's more talkings than actions. And therefore, they didn't have any effect on the supporters of Netanyahu. And again, I must tell you, if he will bring the destruction of Israel, they will still believe in him. It's very hard to move them. Impossible.
So the way you put it, both Gideon and Erika, if I understand it right, the only way to change this is through an exogenous pressure. It cannot change from domestic actors as the situation has unfolded so far.
I have no doubts. I don't know about Erika, but I have no doubts. Change will not come from within Israeli society.
Erika? Yeah, sorry, Gideon.
No.
Sorry, Gideon. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
I don't know, because I am concerned that all external pressure is taken as having the opposite effect. And I don't know the pain threshold of Israeli society, and I'm afraid it's very, very high. Gideon is, first of all, extremely right to say that the European pressure on Israel has been exclusively talk, almost entirely, and even the kind of recognitions of Palestinian statehood have zero actual effect in the real world so far that we can see or feel. And in terms of stopping arms shipments, for example, I know in the ports of Marseille, the workers tried to prevent that, but I don't think that ultimately they were successful. The governments have not cut off Israel for the most part in terms of weapons or anything that has actual material effect. Whether that would actually do the trick or something, perhaps, but I think that in terms of legal pressure and rhetorical pressure, the effects in Israeli society are the opposite, that Israel takes strength, most of the population takes strength from the criticism and is more reassured by it. Maybe economic is a different category that would actually have change. But I think that there, along with external pressure, there needs to be some kind of ideological shift coming from someplace in which Israelis can imagine a change and a different form of relationship. And I find it hard to believe that that will be imported from the outside. I can't imagine how it would be imported from the outside, although I don't know who would bring it from the inside either.
Not groups like Standing Together can make a difference. That was a question by a colleague from Loughborough University, Alex.
I think that the Israeli left has lost numbers and legitimacy. I don't think it exists in a way to have any political influence today.
So Gideon, the Trump plan is doomed to fail if a conclusion can be made out of that, if there is no change of the American strategy and commitment towards, a sustainable solution, right?
Look, we have to stick to something. So we stick to Donald Trump, which is really
Peculiar.
shows you how desperate we are.
Yeah.
We know one thing. He's the only one right now who has the capability to stop Israel, and he had proven it. If he wants, anything he wants now must be done. Israel has no option to say no to Donald Trump on anything, because Israel might find itself very isolated. The fact that Europe is just talking, as Erica said, is mainly because Europe is afraid of Donald Trump. And if Europe would be less paralyzed by Donald Trump, I think they would have taken more steps, because public opinion in Europe is very clear. It's only the governments who stop it. Public opinion is quite clear. You know it from your country and many others, many others, almost all over Europe, including the United States, including the Jewish community in the United States, went through shifts and is still changing. So Trump can do whatever he wants. The problem is that we know who he is and we know what are his priorities. Justice, human rights, Palestinians, equality, those are things which passes him. There is nothing that interests him less than this. It's all about power and money, and here I can be skeptical, but on the other hand, he's the only one who has the leverage in his hand. So until now, at least he stopped the war. Maybe more things will be imposed on Israel. Maybe a final solution, a peace treaty, for sure not.
For sure not. Gideon, Erica, we would like to thank you once again very, very much for painting the situation with the right colors. Although, the conclusions are not very optimistic, we would say, and the situation is bleak. What you explained so far is just level-headed common sense, statements and observations of the situation in Israel. We would like to thank you. We'd like to thank our audience for the very good questions, the very useful questions that helped us to rethink and to understand better what is going on in Israel. And stay tuned for the next webinar, which is coming in a couple of months.
I think it's a good start that we start looking at the internal domestic situation in Israel, which basically is not covered properly, neither in the social media nor in the media. And I think this is a start for a discussion that probably will continue in the next webinars. And we hope we will have another discussion sometime soon. And we concluded on more optimistic and positive notes.
I hope so. I hope so.
But thank you so much for your insights, for your valuable insights, and also for being open to discuss these topics, these sensitive issues, difficult topics in these difficult times with us. Thank you so much.